Wholesalers, it's Rob Shore at Wholesaler Masterminds, and you may be thinking to yourself, Rob, you're thinking, what do you have besides this amazing podcast? And I'm so glad you asked. Wholesaler Masterminds has an assortment of product and services all designed around the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesaling. As an example, we have coaching services designed to help you power wash your practice, whether you have 2 years or 22 years. We'll offer you speaking live engagements at divisional or national sales meetings. Our scheduling service has dedicated professionals trained in the art of getting you more appointments, Wholesaler Mastermind schedulers. Our Speakers Bureau brings you amazing speakers and processes to get better return on investment out of those speakers. And finally, our partnership, our newest partnership with Allego. If you have Allego and want to get the Wholesaler Masterminds channel on your Allego platform, please let us know. Wholesaler Masterminds, happy to bring you this podcast and so much more. Wholesaler Masterminds, the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesaling. I was 18. I was 18 years old. I was in love. You ever been 18 years old in love? I bet. I never told you all this story. I was 18 years old. I was in love, and I ran away from home. I was 18. I didn't really run away, but I left Miami. That's where I was raised, in Miami, Florida. And I packed 2 suitcases, one of which had a black and white TV in it. I was chasing my high school sweetheart, who had bona fide run away before she was 18. And being just in love, because you're in love when you're 18 years old, I made my way to California. I landed in Santa Monica with $280 in my pocket, and I knew the next day that I had to get a job and an apartment. I had to put my money in the bank, and I had to get a job, right? So I walked into Coast Federal Savings, and to make a long story bearable, I walked out of Coast Federal Savings with a bank account, a job, a new friend, and an apartment, and I became an accidental banker. Why do I tell you that story? I tell you that story because today is all about crafting the career that you want to have with purpose, with intention, and not having it be accidental. That's what we're going to come at you today with. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. Wholesalers, welcome back to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. I want to read you a little bit from our guest's book. Most people will spend, at minimum, 100,000 hours building a career. This represents the greatest financial investment of their life. Unfortunately, a great many consider that investment with the same degree of critical thinking as they might the purchase of a lottery ticket, effectively gambling away their future. His book is called The Compass Solution, and it was written for those who want to win their career, not just endure it. Tim Cole's the founder and CEO of Compass Alliance and is the author of The Compass Solution, as I said, a guide to winning your career. He's invested 3+ decades in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry through dozens of restructuring and 5 mergers. He's held multiple leadership and senior executive positions and played a major role in the ascent of a mid-sized firm into one of the largest in the world, with direct involvement in the launch of 20+ pharmaceutical brands, 6 of which became global blockbusters. Tim now focuses his time and energy on sharing secrets and lessons he learned in the corporate world to help others achieve sustainable, successful, and fulfilling careers. Tim Cole, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show.
Thank you, Rob.
It is delightful to have you here. We need to get about the process of unpacking the Compass Solution. So where'd the Compass Solution come from? Obviously, I gave a little bit of background on it, but how do you leave 30 years in corporate America and write a book about successfully navigating your career? What was your catalyst to want to do that?
Yeah, well, I have to say your introductory story caught my attention because in some ways I became an accidental salesman. I stumbled, and it was the Forrest Gump model, into a career in healthcare because I wanted a job. I had no real vision of what I wanted to do, and certainly very little to any purpose. So I found my way through, I guess, serendipitous means into a career because as I got into my world, it began very quickly to turn topsy-turvy. We began to have restructures, downsizings. There was the era of the blockbuster drugs. and then they went away, and then we had healthcare reform and managed care and all the other enchiladas. And before you know it, we I found myself looking one day in the mirror and realizing, well, I see I've had 3, 4, 5 different managers, 4, 5, 6 different jobs. There's no guarantee that I'm going to make it because I'm watching hundreds wiped away sometimes in the blink of an eye. And there came a point, and it was almost like an epiphany. I'm looking in the mirror one day, and I realized that if it was going to be, it was probably going to be up to me, because the only one that traveled with me over the course of this career would be me. And so I began to look for markers, and those markers eventually became the 4 cardinal points of the career compass that I spend so much time talking about in the book, The Compass Solution. So that's the quick and easy on the genesis and the why behind the book.
You know, I'm reflecting on one of the things that you said, and that is the notion of, you know, how change evolved in your industry. And, you know, change is present in all industries, and our industry of financial services and our industry in terms of wholesaling, our niche in financial services, is changing at a fairly rapid clip. And wholesalers, you know, we've covered this on other podcasts. So it's particularly timely, I think, that we can have a discussion about how to grab hold of your career and make sure that you're steering it in a proactive direction that is going to last for the next X, whatever your X is, number of years that you're going to be gainfully employed in corporate America. So Tim, let's start to get about this. Your first marker talks about personal accountability. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, you know, here's the reality that I had to come to grips with, and I'm reminded of a quote that I heard once attributed to, of all people, one of the great poet laureates, Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead. I say that tongue-in-cheek, but in the height of the Vietnam War, Jerry Garcia and that band began to get heavily involved in the anti-war movement. And apparently in an interview at some point, he said, you know, someone had to do something, and it's just incredibly pathetic that it had to be us. And I always loved that quote, because I thought, you know, he's kind of saying, without meaning to say it, that if it's going to be, it's probably going to be up to me. And I think I had my own epiphany, Rob, when, again, I looked in the mirror that day and I realized, you know, I kind of depended on a manager or a supervisor or my vice president to say, okay, this is what you need to do. Okay, go forth and do it. And I would do it. I was a worker. I was always a producer. I could work long hours. And then there came a day when I saw people that had worked equally long hours, that were just as talented as I was. The world changed on them, and they didn't change with it. They didn't adapt. The guidelines changed. The bonus methodology changed. The structure system changed, and they got ground into the earth. And so I began to look at it and say, okay, wait a minute. If I'm really going to embrace this notion of the first cardinal point, which is personal accountability, there's some basic principles that I'm going to have to begin to get my head around. And you talked about one of them, and that's this notion of a purposeful career versus a reactive career. I work with hundreds, maybe thousands of people that were reactionaries. You know, okay, the world changes, so this is what I do. The world changes, so this is what I do. And I began to realize, and I began to look at the people that were really good, that survived and that thrived, and they embraced this notion. The lodestar for my career compass was personal accountability. And I go into great detail in the book, but I can give you some of the things that I learned that are, I guess, subpoints underneath that notion of personal accountability. Here's the first. The only brand you ever really sell, the only brand you ever market, whether you know it or not, is you. And though you may have great products and you have a great message, if you don't treat yourself as the brand and truly market yourself as the brand, probably going to have some problems. Another thing I talk about in great detail is, an owner's mentality versus a renter's mentality. I work with a lot of people who went to work every day, and they checked in, and they did their job, and they produced, but they never looked at their career as an owner would. You know, somebody said once that strategy is nothing more than the intelligent allocation of limited resources, unique set of activities, to gain competitive advantage. And so what I've always tried to proclaim to the people that want to listen to the message I have in the Compass Solution is your first lodestar, your North Star, is always going to be this notion of personal accountability. Now I go into great detail to talk about more particulars, but the backdrop is really that. If you're going to make the career great, it's going to be up to you. There will be a lot of people that help you, but it's going to be ultimately up to you to make that career.
Let's talk about one of those pieces as we selectively work our way through the full volume of work. I mean, we certainly can't cover a 300-page book, but this branding piece, and wholesalers will know why I'm asking this, because we talk a lot at Wholesaler Masterminds about your peerless value proposition, which is something of branding, of course, and I think it's a different kind of branding than you're speaking about. Help us understand from your vantage point, under the heading of personal accountability, what does branding mean, and how do I begin to self-reflect on my own brand?
Yeah, well, I think you just offered a partial answer, because you said something that's very powerful that most people don't do, and that is self-reflect. You know, I talk about in the book, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm going to offer it. Long before emotional intelligence became the buzzword, long before the book was written, I began to realize that the best corporate athletes, the best career athletes I ever worked with, I ever met, kind of intuitively carried two instruments with them. One was a magnifying glass, and one was a mirror. Now, the magnifying glass for most of them was overdeveloped, including my own. I could look at the world, I could look at other people, I could look at the business, I could look at the product, and I had a laser focus. But it took me a long time to do what you just said, and that is to look in the mirror and self-reflect and ask myself tough questions around, okay, am I the best I can be? Am I playing at optimal level, or am I punching a card and just going to work every day? And so I think the simple answer is, when you talk about this notion of branding you, it requires the discipline to look at yourself and say, am I really best in class, or am I just going through the motions? Am I treating myself as the brand, and am I unique enough in how I market my characteristics that people go, yeah, that's the guy? When I finally realized, you know, it really is going to be me treating me as a brand and using a career strategy to build that brand, things got a lot easier. But I had to learn to look in the mirror, and for most of us, particularly for me, that was sometimes very, very hard to do, because you have to see yourself, warts and all.
When you talk about the owner's mentality, I'm just thinking about, you know, sometimes we fall into the victim mentality, which is,
Yep.
I can't control it. It's beyond what I have the capacity to influence. So I guess I just have to soldier on and carry the flag. How does the owner's mentality? What are the kind of the hallmarks of the owner's mentality? What are the telltale signs?
Well, I'll offer one of the chapter titles, because as you're talking, you know, it's funny, as I talk to leaders in other fields, I'm amazed at the similarity between the financial world and the world that I came from. And one of the people that was influential, Rob, for me in my career, had a saying, and he always said it, and it ticked me off at the time because I was very young. He would look at me sometimes when I would be aggravated about this set of circumstances, or how I was being paid, or maybe the way the distribution of the bonus was, whatever it might be, but there was usually something I could find fault with. And he looked at me one day and he said, Tim, it ain't fair, but it's there. And I was thinking, okay, you know, it's one of these things you go, oh, thanks, I really appreciate that insight. But over time, I think I finally began to realize, to your point, hey, there's nothing about the world that we're in that is an absolute meritocracy. It just doesn't exist. And if you want to believe that you have the same starting point and the same touchdown goal line, the same rules that apply to everybody, that they apply to you, the answer is no, they don't. It's not always going to be fair. There are going to be situations where you have to, using your terminology, soldier on. And I think what I've tried to impress on people is, look, if you really think, if you're talking to somebody that's survived and thrived in any field, financial, healthcare, XYZ, whatever it might be, if you think they didn't come through adversity and come out on the other side stronger, then you're a fool. You know, I think the Stoics said it best, oftentimes the obstacle is the way. Mm-hmm. And what I try to stress to people is, yeah, it's going to be tough. You're going to get knocked down, but just like in the sport of boxing, you get yourself up off the canvas, you dust your gloves off, and you go back into the fight. And I don't want to make it sound like a rah-rah kind of thing, but I would dare say, Rob, in your experience, you've probably had a few cases where you got knocked down and bloodied, but you found a way to persevere. So when I say owning, I'm saying you can't own everything that happens to you, but you can own your response.
So the first marker is personal accountability. The second marker that you talk about is people. Give us a descriptor of that and help us better understand that second marker, please.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the first marker is all about optimizing self. And I thought when I figured that out, Rob, I had it. I figured it out. I got it. I'll be the best I can be. I'll demonstrate to the company my value. Things will be good forevermore. And then I found that, especially because I spent years in sales and sales leadership roles, I found that in the world, at least that I was a part of, I could be a strong individual agent. I could be a lone wolf. But sometimes even lone wolves have to be able to run with a pack. And so I began to look at, okay, the people that were really influential within my organization, did they have a set of skills that maybe I didn't truly appreciate? And in time, I began to realize, yeah, they do. They have a capacity to work with other people. They have a willingness to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. And more often than not, they were, and I hate to use the term because it's a sports metaphor, but they were pretty good team players. They didn't always agree with everyone, but it kind of looked and said that, it's not going to be just up to me. I've got to make sure I can make the team, the department, the unit, whatever it might be, better. And so I began to study the people that were great in terms of people skills and to quantify and, I guess for lack of a better term, codify some of the things that they were doing that in some cases the vast majority had no idea of.
What's interesting is knowing you came out of pharma and knowing very, very little about that world, but observing the perceived similarities between a pharma rep and a wholesaler, and perceiving the same lone wolf type of mentality. Wholesalers, it's really easy, and we've talked about this before, it's really easy to suppose that you're on an island and suppose that the home office is the enemy and suppose that the only thing that matters are the four doors and roof of your car and the interactions you have with advisors. And that's why the message that Tim is sending, I think, is such a loud one, because we too tend to look past the people sometimes. Is that accurate, Tim? Is that a spot on similarity to pharma reps?
Yeah, it's beyond spot on. It's eerily the same. One of the things I talk about, and I think this adds credence to what you're saying, Rob. One of the chapters I have in the book is called "Another Brick in the Wall," and that's a metaphor. But it's a metaphor for this us and they mentality that can develop in organizations where if I'm the guy that's, and I'll use as an example, I'm the sales rep. I'm out creating demand. I'm out making this engine run. It's really easy for me to grow dissatisfied, distrustful, and occasionally just outright aggressively angry toward the person that sits in the home office because, after all, they don't know what I know. And the same thing is true if you're sitting at a corporate desk somewhere to say, what are these idiots doing? And I think what I try to say to people, and again, this is the lessons of a lifetime that I share in the book, The Compass Solution. I try to say to people, hey, look, it's never completely the way you think it is, and it's easy to be angry, a racist. It's easy to be whatever term you want to call when you don't take the time to at least listen and seek to understand. And I use a quote that comes from Isaac Asimov in the book that says, people who think they know everything are a great annoyance to those of us who do. Because the reality is none of us really do. Socrates said, the only thing I know for sure is I know nothing completely for sure. And I think that's probably what I try to imply. There's always going to be the us, they, but the most mature employees I've run across are the ones that can take the time to at least consider the other person's viewpoint.
Let's make sure that we get these two markers in our allotted time. Let's talk about process. So number one is personal accountability. Number two is people. And number three is process. What's process about?
Yeah, process, at least in the terms of the book, The Compass Solution, is this. Okay, so North Star, personal accountability, people, how do you optimize others? For me, process was learning how my business and my company really worked. And by that I mean, what are the gears that make this larger whole come together? How are decisions made? How do departments, how are they charged with working with one another? Do I understand the purpose, the vision of my organization, or am I totally focused on my little corner of the world? And so what I try to say to people is, look, if you understand how your business and your company really works, then your chances of being much more strategic in the day-to-day increase exponentially. If you're really just focused on, I'll use your example, the car or the cubicle or what your latest goal statement is, you're living in a ridiculously stupid vacuum. Understand how the larger business works, and you're able to make more informed decisions. And so I spent a lot of time talking about process in the book because that was the hardest one, Rob, for me to learn. I was always the guy that puts his head down, go get it done, and sometimes blindly oblivious to what the organization was dealing with, and that sometimes hurt me.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Tim, because by nature of perhaps the sales beast, we assume that we're just wound up to go hunt and kill. And whatever goes on at the home office is what goes on at the home office. And if they want to go through whatever changes they're going through regulatorily or through compliance or through legal or through product or through marketing, just go through it and shut up and give me the product and I'll go.
Yeah.
But we're agreeing, because we are agreeing, that that's not going to create the whole wholesaler or the whole pharma rep or the whole successful salesperson.
That's it, exactly. You said it perfectly.
What about perspective? That's the fourth marker, perspective.
Yeah, well, let me give you a backdrop on this. I've said to people before, and I'm not necessarily proud of it, but I probably, if I'm not a recovered workaholic, then I was a borderline workaholic through at least a part of my career. Because, like a lot of people that go into sales, there are a lot of achievers in sales. That's who you want to hire. That's the people that they're going to push the edge of the envelope. They're the ones that are going to build your future. And I loved it. And, fame and prosperity is kind of like salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. And if you're not careful, it leads to insanity in both cases. Mm-hmm. And so what I try to say, hopefully the right way in the book, is, North Star, personal accountability, people, process, those are all things you need to know. But the fourth cardinal point I call perspective. And what I'm trying to say to people is, look, I want you to be incredibly successful. I want you to win this career, but I want you to have a balance that ensures that you're also winning emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, and that you have a sense of perspective and don't allow yourself, and I've seen it in some cases, I don't want people at age 54 to drop dead from a heart attack. I want them to maintain a balance. So I spent a lot of time in the perspective piece talking about practical tips that I had to learn, and sometimes it's very functional, like exercise and diet and social network. It's all the things that hopefully will help people have a long and sustainable career, and they come out on the other side good professionally and personally and can say, hey, I won this thing. So that's the fourth cardinal point of perspective.
Isn't it scary, wholesalers? I mean, here we are talking to a senior leader from a completely different industry, and they're speaking to us because this all could be exactly transposed over into our world. Every last shred of it makes sense over into our world. So, Tim, the thought here, and the successful thought at that you the story that you paint successfully, is that if I take personal accountability with people, with process, with perspective, use that as my markers, and then blend that together with my three keys, which we do not have time to talk about, wholesalers. Sorry, you got to go buy the book. And that's leadership, being a person of influence, communication, and learning. I will be the ambassador of my own career versus, as I started the story, the time when I was the accidental banker. Do I have that right?
I think you hit it perfectly. I need for you to articulate the elevator speech. I think you may do it better than I do, Rob.
Tim, you're very kind. Thank you for being here with my audience today.
Thank you very much.
Wholesalers, come back next time for the episode of the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. You'll find all of our content at wholesalermasterminds.com, and the podcast can be found at iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play.